Right. What I was going to say, as I mentioned, it's always good for me to follow Ian because he prepares the ground so well for many of the things which I'm going to go through. And I, many years ago, met a very interesting philosopher called J. Krishnamurti, and he referred to the crisis in consciousness that we're facing at the moment, which is really between whether AI is going to become a master of human consciousness or a servant. And the film 2001 Space Odyssey was a classic illustration of the struggle between AI and humanity. And in that film, I'm glad to say that humanity won. And this is a paragraph that Cassie developed as a protection against possible interference. People who think we're conspiracy theorists, which of course we're not. We're just telling the truth as we perceive it. And if I go on now, because everything that I'm going to explain about the traffic monitoring system is part of the 5G network, which is part of what Ian mentioned, because he said AI comes out of the weaponized system for war, and in many ways, we're in a war environment. And quickly, just to explain what 5G is, it's a backhaul technology which scans the field, picks up the data, and sends it back to an AI analytical computer. And that's what they want to do to humanity. I'll come back to that in a minute. Here's a graphic illustration of the difference between isotropic, which is 2G, 3G, 4G, and 5G. Isotropic is on the top left, where you throw a pebble into the lake and the rings go out. And the further you're away from the rings, the safer you are. 5G is a collimation of signal into a beam wave, and you need a beam wave to do the scanning to pick up data from the field. And this is from, what was the name of the council? I think it was Southend Council. Oh yes, Southend Government. And they are showing in a planning application that they're approving certain technology as part of the long-range wireless area network, which is the Internet of Things. And the World Economic Forum and the sort of people behind AI in a bad way want to do two things. They want to reduce the population, and I'll come back to that in a minute, rather like the Malthusians did in the Victorian age, and they want to control humanity, not partially, but absolutely. And nanotechnology plays a very important part in that control. Now, here is an excerpt from a document referring to the Club of Rome, which is connected with the United Nations. And it's an interesting sentence here. Given global instabilities, including those in the former Soviet bloc, the need for firm control of world technology, weaponry, and natural resources is now absolutely mandatory. The immediate reduction of world population, according to the mid-1970s recommendations of the Labour Fund, must be immediately effected. Now, you see reference to the Club of Rome and Limits to Growth. And Limits to Growth was a book written jointly by a man called Dennis Meadows. And if I just go back to that slide, at the bottom you can see, unfortunately I've got to move the people out of the way, then I can see it. I just go back. Dennis Meadows, co-author of Limits to Growth, and he wanted, if you go onto YouTube, you can actually see his interview, and he says he wants to reduce the population from about 8 or 9 billion down to 1 billion. So you can see these people, they want to reduce human population, just like the Malthusians did in the Victorian age. And here is the effect of nanoparticulates floating in the bloodstream throughout the body, and how these nanoparticulates get into the brain through the blood-brain barrier. Now, why do I mention that? Because it's known by ICNIRP, the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, which is relied on by government in the UK locally and nationally. If you've got metal particulates in your body, you're outside the government safety guidance, and they know that these particulates multiply the effect of the radiation in your body. Now, the little diagram at the bottom is quite interesting because here is a larger picture, because it depicts what's called the morphogenetic field. In other words, it's a natural Wi-Fi field, not a harmful one. And in that field is your consciousness. My learned friend Ian, who I have a tremendous respect for, referred to Roger Penrose. Roger Penrose is a quantum physicist, and the quantum physicists are now catching up with the ancient Vedic philosophy of several thousand years ago, which explained that consciousness is not in your brain. Your brain accesses it, and it's in a field, and that field is called a morphogenetic field, and you can see that field in yellow. Now, fifth generation warfare, and I go back to what Ian said, if they're doing it in war, it will come to us. Well, it has come to us. Fifth generation warfare, if I just quote on the left, warfare in the cognitive age, neurostrike, and the PLA, that's the People's Liberation Army in China, they're advanced psychological weapons and tactics. Now, if you change that yellow field, which is an electromagnetic field, through polluting technology, you're going to change human consciousness. And this is an excerpt from fifth generation warfare neurostrike. The PLA's integration of psychological warfare techniques reflects a recognition of psychological state of combatants as a crucial factor in the process of military operations. Don't forget what Ian said, very prescient he was. If they're doing it in war, it'll come to us. Advanced technologies like AI and brain-computer interfaces have introduced new dimensions of psychological warfare, enabling the People's Liberation Army to manipulate information perceptions and decision-making processes. In other words, they've got total control over your consciousness. And what is all this to do with traffic monitoring? That's a very intelligent question. Here, this is a modem, 5G modem, in Transport for London's traffic monitoring system, manufactured by UNED. And we'll come back to that modem in due course. And Ian mentioned Sir Richard Dearlove. He said, I was head of MI6, not me, this is Sir Richard Dearlove. Here's how China can shut down UK cities. Well, they've got all the data on people in the London traffic zone, and all of that data, because of 5G, is scanned and backhauled to an AI computer. And where was the modem made? It was made in China. So it makes a lot of sense of what Sir Richard Dearlove said. So let's have a look at what they're doing and why, once it's all exposed, the public will demand legal removal of relevant 5G equipment. That's quite a bold statement, but I'm minded of dear Lord Mandelson. He was quite confident of being British ambassador to America and being in the high life until the great British public realized that he was mixing with Epstein, and then he was finished. And that finishing was done by public awareness. And when the public fully understand what is being rolled out, what has been rolled out in London, and what is being rolled out in other cities in the UK and on our motorways and in other countries, like the Epstein effect, the whole lot will come tumbling down. And here are the details, some specific details of what's been installed in the ULEZ zone, the ultra-low emission zone in London. You've got two very powerful radar devices, and you've got, if you look at number 3, that's a combination of laser infrared technology, visible camera technology, and number 2 radar and number 1 radar. And all of that is beaming on innocent individuals queuing up either in their cars, like taxi drivers, or people walking their dog. Now, here is part of the radar equipment, and as I mentioned, similar technology is being installed in Manchester, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Leeds, Birmingham, Newcastle, and that's going on and has been installed in certain of those cities and is being installed now. And this is a picture of what's called a Heimdall radar detector. And it says here in black and white in the Unex manufacturer's document. This is the documents of the manufacturer of the equipment in the TfL London area. And you can see it says the Heimdall detector hardware is a radar device. Now, here are details of the device: 24 gigahertz and 13 gigahertz curbside on crossing. Those are the technical details. And here is an example of phased array radar. And these are the cells in the antenna. And you can see how they form the beams of 5G to scan the emitted information. And we'll come back to what emitted information they're going to pick up shortly. This is the other device, which is the LiDAR, which is infrared laser light. And you can see in the middle picture on the top, and the cover removed, and you can see the laser diodes underneath those two lenses. And if we go further, on the picture on the left on the bottom, you can see the array of laser diodes. There are 24 of them in what's called a fabric Perot structure, which focuses the beam. And you can see the laser warnings on, those two red circles are laser warnings. And this is doing tomography. In other words, it's scanning under your skin, and it's doing what's called mesoscopic scanning, 5G mesoscopic scanning. That is at the nano level, and you can see why the nanoparticulates in the vaccines fit in with this agenda. Now, the laser diodes in the device, let's go back to the device. You can see the laser diodes in that middle picture. They transport filament say they're LED, light-emitting diodes, but they're not light-emitting diodes, LEDs, they're laser diode. And you can see that because you've got two laser warnings inside the equipment. And here, unfortunately for TfL, they have a product identification code on these laser diodes, and it's an Osram Black SFH4715AS. Now, that has a certain power output, and it has, when run at 1 amp, it has 1900 milliwatts per steradian. Now, a steradian is less than a centimeter squared, so you've got 24 of them, which makes 21,600 milliwatts per steradian. And what is the government's so-called safe level from ICNIRP, the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, is 1 milliwatt. So this single setup is at least 21,600 times the government's so-called safety level, and they're beaming at you when you stand innocently at the traffic lights. I say at least because a steradian is less than a centimeter squared, so you're going to have much more than that, really, in terms of ICNIRP guidance beaming into your eyes. And light can affect your physiology. And here are light-based approaches to cardiac arrhythmia research. So if they didn't really like what Nicholas Martin or Sir Ian Jarvis was saying, they could send certain signals and switch off our hearts through this technology. And radar is a known carcinogen, causes of death amongst Belgian professional military radar operators, a 37-year retrospective cohort study. And LiDAR, which is the concentrated infrared light, and we were talking in a fabric Perot structure to focus the beam, by ICNIRP, which is what the government relies on, as I mentioned, their own document prepared for them by Professor Okuno says infrared cataract and temperature elevation within the eye. In other words, infrared technology is going to damage your eyesight by the government's own guidance. Now, on the left, you'll see a reference. I mean, it's probably too small for many people to read, but I'll read it out because it relates to what Ian was just mentioning. Fusion, which is a combination of LiDAR, radar, and visible light technology, as an advanced mesoscopic simulation methodology built into its algorithm, to swiftly evaluate the impact of the adaptations considered within the optimization process for each optimization call. This digital twin approach performs multiple mesoscopic simulations to model all detected and forecast road users. Now, in other words, just to translate that into English, they're taking your mesoscopic information and making a digital twin out of you and putting it on the cloud into an area. Now, if we go back to that diagram that we showed you earlier, which was very interesting here, that is you. You have we all do, have a morphogenetic field, which is a quantum field. In quantum field, there's something called entanglement, which means the digital twin, which they create and stick in the cloud in their data sensors, will be entangled with your own real consciousness. In other words, there's a quantum relationship between the two, and it implies that they can change your consciousness through control over the digital twin. And all of this is connected with what Ian was talking about, the use of AI. Going back to the bad physiological effects of this traffic monitoring equipment, you know, when the police hold out radar guns to monitor speed, the mobile radar guns, you know, a handheld one, evidence of brain cancer from occupational exposure to pulse microwaves from a police radar. Well, you can think of a traffic jam, or you can think of a taxi driver or a bus driver. They're going to repeatedly queue up at traffic lights as a result of their journeys through London. And the effects of this radiation are cumulative, because, for example, a dentist won't go into the room when he's x-raying you, because he knows if he goes in, the cumulative effects will give him cancer and he'll drop dead. Well, these unsuspecting taxi drivers are getting damage to their eyesight from the LiDAR. They're getting very, very high doses of radar radiation, and the effects are cumulative. And 1 in 2 people in the UK get cancer. And for this technology, it was 5% of the British population. So this is what's going on. Now, the government all around the world, or I should say the people behind the government, because probably the government people themselves don't know the connection between the vaccines, so-called vaccines, and this technology. And you can see Oxford Nanopore Technologies partners with the UK government to roll out Lampor, a new generation of COVID-19 tests. Now, and there you are. You can see they understand the relation between nanotechnology and what we're discussing now, the electromagnetic field, back all of data. And if you look up Yuval Noah Harari on YouTube, he was deputy to Klaus Schwab, who was the former chief of the World Economic Forum. Yuval Noah Harari said the pandemic was the opportunity for us to go under the skin. And now you can see how they're doing it through the traffic monitoring system. And mesoscopic simulation on the left, this comes from their very own literature, is nano-level surveillance. Now, what is very interesting, AIDS, which is Adult Child Health and Environmental Support, of which Ian and I are involved, they supported a court case against Transport for London because they've installed this monstrous technology. Now, I've shown you that a Heimdall radar detector is in the manufacturer's document, and Transport for London commissioned an integrated impact assessment on the equipment before they installed it. And that report says, or rather the Transport for London say, we consider it more likely that the report does not reference the Heimdall radar detectors, for example, such matters because they do not exist. That is the court referring to the integrated impact assessment. And the impact assessment doesn't refer to the radar scanning, and so the court says it doesn't exist. But you can see it does exist because it's in the manufacturer's literature. They say they've got Heimdall radar detectors, and they detail it. And what is more, after the court case, I was so shocked with the result that I sent in a Freedom of Information request to Transport for London and asked them how many radar detectors they've got. And they wrote back and said they've got 10,764 Heimdall radar detectors deployed in London. Now, that throws up some very important questions about our legal system, I would have thought, or many people might think. And this is a reply by the Freedom of Information request by the litigant who brought the court case that AIC supported. And in that reply by the Information Commissioner's Office, it says, as advised, the ANPR cameras use vision-based detection, which we use to enforce ULEZ. We do not use a radar system. Well, they've installed this technology, and it's made by Unix, and Unix has said it includes a radar system. In fact, you've seen the name of it, Heimdall Radar System, and we've got all the details on it, including the frequency at which it operates. And this article on the left shows 3D radiometric mapping by means of LiDAR SLAM. And SLAM is simultaneous localization and mapping, which is the process by which you can make a 3D twin, a digital twin. So here we are. We've got it being installed, this type of technology in Newcastle, even in Wokingham, where I happen to be a local councillor myself, on the parish level, not on the borough level. Otherwise, I would have objected at the borough that they should remove this, and I wouldn't have voted in favour of it, of course, but I'm at the parish level. The borough knows that I'm against this technology, of course, and I'm seeing my MP to update him because we've got a new MP. And on the right, this is an article that Ian sent to me from Metro, which you get on the London Underground. They're installing even more of this equipment, supplemental to what they've installed in the ULEZ zone, to enforce the 20-mile-an-hour limit. But this is likely to include also this very advanced radar technology. So if we go back to this Malthusian attempt to do two things. One is to reduce the human population, and the other is to control the remainder absolutely through AI. And I am optimistic that humanity will relegate AI as a servant, not as a master, as the film 2001: A Space Odyssey illustrates. And I've forgotten the name of that director, but he was a very prescient director. Forgotten his name, but he was very, very good.
Kubrick.
Yeah, Stanley Kubrick, absolutely. And he warned us about these people who do funny rituals in his film Eyes Wide Shut, of course. In relation to Swisscom, they're a well-known telecom company in Switzerland, the biggest there, I think. They applied for a patent, and in the patent they say this radiation can cause damage to genetic material, in particular in human white blood cells, whereby both the DNA itself is damaged and the number of chromosomes changed. This mutation can consequently lead to increased cancer risk. Now, chromosomal translocation in genetics is chromosomal translocation, a phenomenon that results in unusual rearrangement of chromosomes, which is exactly what Swisscom were pointing out. The telecom companies know this, and the governments know it. And translocations are genetic changes that occur when chromosomes break and reattach to other chromosomes. They can be balanced or unbalanced and can cause disorders like Down syndrome, leukemia, and lymphoma. And that lymphoma, of course, is the cancer risk that Swisscom pointed out in their application. And if you've got people queuing up all day long at these traffic lights, they're going to be exposed to this genetic damage and to damage to their eyesight. But I'm very optimistic. I'm optimistic that we'll relegate AI as a servant of humanity and not allow it to become a master. And I'm optimistic about the Peter Mandelson effect and the potency of public awareness. And here is Peter Mandelson, no more the British ambassador to America, because he was so connected, as you can see, with that paedophile, Jeffrey Epstein. And there are ways to get this nanotechnology out of the body if people have been unlucky enough to have taken this COVID vaccine. And if you go onto the AIC's website and look under sites of interest, you can see reference to a qualified naturopath, Caroline Mansfield, and she, on her website, under products, you can see she goes into the details of detoxification. I'm not giving anybody any medical advice because I'm not qualified to, but Caroline Mansfield is. And there we are, that's the end of my talk.
So thank you, Nicholas. I really, really, really appreciate that.